Hey everyone, Beardo here coming at you with a Minutia Minute. Hope you enjoy this one. This is one I've been wanting to do for a long time. I've been kind of nervous to do it, so I've kind of shied away from it. I'm not sure if it's something that's going to work very well, but I'm hoping it does, and so here's to trying. In order to participate in this Minutia Minute, however, you are going to need a copy of Tim Burton's Batman Returns. The reason is because I'm going to be doing a full-length audio commentary on this movie, and you'll be able to sync it up with your DVD and hopefully enjoy some commentary from me. So I'll go into more detail as to why I picked that particular movie to do a commentary on once we kind of get the commentary going. For now, however, I'm going to help you queue up your DVD. So what we're going to do is when I tell you, I'm going to have you pause this video and then go ahead and queue up your copy of Batman Returns, whether it's digital, DVD, doesn't matter, should work. Go ahead and get your main menu, press play. When the Warner Brothers screen comes up on the screen and then fades out, at that moment, I want you to turn off the pause in this video. I'll start talking, and theoretically, everything should be synced up well. So on the count of three, what I want you to do, again, pause this video, put in your Batman Returns, copy of Batman Returns, get the logo up. Once the Warner Brothers logo disappears off the screen, hit play again, but not before that, all right? So on the count of three, 1, 2, 3. All right, welcome back. So if everything has worked out correctly, you should be seeing Cobblepot Manor, a swooping crane shot into the miniature. You see a man in the window, that's going to be Tucker Cobblepot, and we cut to him right now. Okay, so like I said, welcome back. For this pre-title sequence, I figured I would just kind of take a moment to talk about why I chose Batman Returns, not one of the other Batman movies. Now, of the original 4 Batman movies from the 90s, this one's actually my favorite. There, I said it. It's not my favorite because it's a good Batman movie. As a matter of fact, it's probably the worst. Maybe even worse than Batman and Robin in a lot of ways, because it's just so, like, they're both sort of equally insulting to the character, but this one sort of seems to get a pass because Tim Burton did it. But I think this movie is fantastic. I mean, where else are you going to see the Penguin eat a cat as an infant? Like, it's just, like, so out there. It kind of, like, if you think of, like, the 60s and Lorenzo Semple working on the Batman TV show, and he read these comic books and he's like, well, this is really campy, so I'm gonna play the camp for laughs and just like bring out the the sort of cheesy 60s humor of the whole thing. This, you could almost say, is the screenwriters and director looking at the first film and seeing how dark it is and just how like dementedly hilarious it is, and bringing out the cynical, just like foul, snarky underbelly of the whole undertaking. It's very much a sequel where Tim Burton had complete control over making it, and it's almost a commentary on the first film in my eyes, looking at kind of just sort of how darkly obscene the whole idea of this dark Batman that they've brought to the screen really is. So for better or for worse, I really enjoy this movie. I think that it's terrible but great. So I hope you enjoy my commentary of it. So since we're kind of going over the main credits here, I should probably talk about who all is involved in the film. Obviously, Tim Burton directed it. Denise Denovi and Tim Burton also produced the film, taking the reins from John Peters and Peter Guber, who produced the first film, which is really a sign that the studio was clearly turning everything over to Tim Burton, and sort of the property controllers, aka Peters and Guber, kind of take a back burner. Also, executive producing the film is Michael Uslan and Benjamin Malinker, who are actually the only 2 people, I think, that have been involved in every single iteration from the 1989 Batman to Batman Forever, Batman and Robin, and the Dark Knight trilogy. They've done Man of Steel now, and they actually just most recently produced the Lego Movie, which is, I'm sure, why Batman plays such a big part in that film as well. Otherwise, besides sort of the the producing, sort of moving around of the producers of the movie, and shuttling in some new talent there. There's actually quite a bit of different talent on this movie, which is why, even though it's dark like the first movie, it doesn't really look like the first movie. It doesn't really feel like the first movie. Color palette is completely different. Production design is completely different. The batsuit is completely different. Bo Welch is the production designer of this film. Someone who the director of photography is Stefan. I'm going to completely butcher his name. Zapaski or something like that is the director of photography, and you can tell. I mean, the movie looks like ink. It's like the whole movie. I mean, especially where I'm looking at this sort of shadow of the baby carriage moving through the sewers. It literally looks like ink, just like kind of running across the screen, and that's kind of the whole movie, which is something that the movie was heavily criticized for. But it's one of the things I like best about it. I think the sort of ink blotty nature of the way this movie looks is really a statement of a great statement. I think it takes a very talented director of photography to pull off that kind of minimal color and have it look good. And I think that this movie looks very good. After all, you do have to remember that this is before digital cinema, before all that stuff. So not easy to pull something like this off, even though it is almost monochromatic. And again, that kind of adds to the whole charm of sort of the almost German expressionism that this movie is kind of playing into. This movie is almost more of a tribute to German expressionism than it is anything to do with DC Comics or Batman related. Which, again, as I said, I didn't say it was a good Batman movie. I just said I enjoy this as a movie. So how did we get here? Like, why is this movie so bad? Or why is it not Batman-like? I mean, obviously there are still some pretty strong fans of Tim Burton's Batman movies. But they're kind of drifting away. Like, I know some people who, grew up, I grew up with the Tim Burton Batman movies, and I find, especially the first one, actually almost unwatchable nowadays. Which is, I never would have thought would be the case when I was younger, but the fact of the matter is, partly the Nolanverse has gotten it so much more right, but it's more a matter of realizing just how wrong Tim Burton got these movies. He did a very important thing, which is he brought Batman out of the 60s in the light of the public. Obviously, in the comics, he had been out of the 60s for years and years and years, but what they did with the first Batman movie was, rather than make an adaptation of sort of Batman as a character as a whole, which is, I think, what Christopher Nolan tried to do, was kind of take in all that different mythology and really compile it down and sort of add his spin to it. What they did with the first Batman movie in 1989 was really try and make an adaptation of his first appearance in, like, Detective Comics. No Robin, no nothing. This is a Batman that kills. Batman, carried a gun in his first couple of adventures before they kind of wised up to that. And, it's definitely an interesting undertaking. It's an interesting counterpoint to a lot of the comic books that were coming out at the time, because it was sort of returning to those dark roots more than even the comic books had. But then the problem is, where do you go from there? And the answer is, you go to Batman Returns, which is, again, if you one up everything from Batman, you end up with what basically is like dark comedy. It's just a farce. In the way that the 60s Batman is campy, and brings out the camp elements of Batman, this is a movie that brings out the dark elements of Batman to the point where it's funny. Basically the exact opposite of the 60s, although it still is equally funny, at least in my mind. One of the things I got to talk about here, since he's on the screen, Christopher Walken, a great addition to this movie. This is a character that I'm not sure if he ever really appeared in the comics. He may have once or twice. Not before this movie. Like, after the movie, he may have appeared. He is an original creation by Tim Burton and his crew. But wow, what a great villain. Like, this is someone we need to get into the comic books now. Like, they should reinvent this guy for the new 52 and bring him in, because fantastically evil. A great potential counterpoint to Bruce Wayne, even though they don't really use him that way in this movie. but definitely an interesting character and a sign of one of the other big complaints people have about this particular Batman movie, which is there are way too many characters. We've got the future Catwoman, we've got Christopher Walken, who's like an all-new villain. We're already going to have the Penguin in this as well. Of course, we have Batman, and Tim Burton and company do actually, I think, a pretty good job of balancing all these characters and really service to make this movie, dare I say it, truly epic. I mean, this is a movie that has lots and lots of characters, lots and lots of things going on, and you get a full character arc from all of the characters that they bring into this movie. There were rumors that they were going to try and bring Robin in, which they had tried to do in the first movie and didn't because there wasn't enough screen time. And imagining Robin being in this movie, it would have been probably 3 hours long. But everyone gets serviced in this, and I think that that's something that, obviously, yes, you're not seeing as much Batman, but again, the Batman we're going to see isn't really Batman anyway, as I've already said. So, why not really relish in, the city that they've created in this, again, sort of almost German expressionist version of Gotham City, taken to the absolute extremes. I always wonder what Michael Uslan, one of the executive producers on this movie, actually a very, very interesting guy. He actually started out in the 70s in college. He taught the first accredited comic book course ever in the United States, probably in the world, actually, which he taught as a student, which is very cool. And his sort of, breaching that territory got the attention of the comic books community, and he started getting calls left and right from them saying, hey, what do you want to do? Like, hook up with us. You're teaching our stuff, and we think this is amazing, and it's, great that the industry is getting this attention. We want you to do something for us. And he said, hey, I want to make a dark Batman movie based on the very first, Batman appearance. And so that's what he did for the next 13 years, and he's been doing that ever since. Really cool, but I wonder, I mean, he's obviously, I've seen him in interviews, and, he's always very quick to defend really all of his movies, but there is such an incredible range of quality. From Tim Burton to Joel Schumacher, even within the Nolanverse, there's a pretty broad range of quality there now at this point, especially if you include Man of Steel. And I have to wonder what he really thinks, if he were to just sit down and watch these movies and separate himself from them, what his opinion of these, especially like, say, Batman Returns and Batman and Robin would be. You'll see me grouping Batman Returns and Batman and Robin together because they're, both the kind of the two extremes. Like I said, the 60s camp is really brought out in Batman and Robin, and this one, it brings out the darkness camp, or whatever you want to call it, and the dark humor that exists in the character. Whereas I think Batman is a little bit more of a better approach. It's a dark approach for sure, and it's not a particularly engaging one. Bruce Wayne's a very boring character. I actually have a lot of trouble sitting through that movie, if not for Jack Nicholson. And then Batman Forever is also a little bit more balanced. I know people, obviously the Joel Schumacher ones are the ones that you're supposed to hate. I think of all four of the movies from the 90s, I think that Batman Forever is actually probably the best written, and overall, dare I say it, best executed. And I don't say that lightly because obviously everyone hates those movies. But the fact of the matter is, everyone in Batman Forever, all the characters are counterpoint to each other. They all, service the story in some way. You have the Riddler and Two-Face, which, again, setting aside how they're interpreted versus how they appear in the comics. Oh wait, hang on. This is my favorite part. Bruce Wayne. This is the epitome of Tim Burton's Bruce Wayne. What does he do? He doesn't do anything. He just sits in his office and waits for this to happen. Just ridiculous. Oh man, you gotta love it. This is the definition of brooding Bruce Wayne. Like, it's kind of like they took what Bruce Wayne is thinking in his head and took out all of the Playboy stuff that he does to kind of make himself visible in the world, and just said, no, what's in his head is what he's really gonna do in this movie. Anyway, So Batman Forever. The thing about Batman Forever is it's of all the Batman movies, it's the only one where, and again, accuracy aside, it's the only one where all the characters really make sense, counterpoint each other, and support the story. Batman's love interest is a psychologist. It's the first movie to really delve into Batman's emotional scarring from the death of his parents at all. I mean, that didn't really happen in the first movie. You don't even really get the origin of Batman in the first movie. You just know that the Joker killed his parents. That's really as far as it goes. Batman Forever is the one that really fleshed out that origin story. So you get to know who Batman Bruce Wayne is better. Two-Face and Riddler, even though they're ridiculous characters, really counterpoint each other and sort of play the two different villain strengths, which is the strength and the smarts. And you get into that psychology a little bit more. Obviously, it's not, it's cheesy 90s entertainment in the spirit of like Independence Day almost, just with its excessive use of bad computer graphics and colorful computer animation. But from a script perspective, it really probably holds up best out of all of these movies, even though it isn't a movie that people particularly love. I'm not going to pretend that that's not the case. All right, here we go. So now we're into seeing what Batman's like. Batman is someone who drives around in a very interesting Batmobile and lights people on fire. Here we go. Oh yeah, there's a really awesome gadget that Batman totally has on his car. No remorse. Look at that. No one cares. He just drives away. No big deal. Fighting crime, killing people. It's so important. These movies miss. There's two things. Well, there's way more than two things, but two things I'm going to say as far as what. Never mind the Bruce Wayne side. Let's just talk about the Batman side. The two biggest things that they miss in these movies is one, the fact that he kills. That it's really important that he doesn't kill from a character point. His parents were killed in an alley. He is, deliberately choosing not to kill, for better or for worse. If you think it's silly or you think, there's no point in not killing, it doesn't change the fact that that's really inherent in his character, and there's really no way around it. More so than I think a lot of the other superhero characters. It's really important that Batman doesn't kill, and of course he kills left and right in this. The other thing that they're really missing out on is having the Joker be the reason that Batman's parents were taken from him, as established in the first movie, just robs so much depth from the character, because the whole point is that his parents were killed by a nobody. If it's the Joker, everything fits together a little too neatly, and you get this convenient revenge story that'll work in the first movie, but it leaves you completely having to build from ground zero in the second movie, because the whole point is that it was a meaningless crime that took his parents, and he's going to obsess over something that's ultimately meaningless. And the fact that he doesn't kill people just makes his fight that much more impossible, and it makes for a very dynamic, interesting Batman. But those two elements are completely missing from this interpretation. And I'll be happy to talk more about what they missed with Bruce Wayne, but we'll wait till maybe Bruce Wayne is on the screen, because here we have to introduce Mayor Cobblepot, or I should say, soon to be running for Mayor Cobblepot, aka the Penguin. And again, right there, we just saw that sort of face on the wall. Very German. It looks so Germanic to me. I love the miniatures in these movies. They're obviously miniatures. It's easy to laugh at them. I think the first movie, they're miniatures that look like miniatures and kind of fall apart. They don't look like good miniatures. In this movie, it's almost they're miniatures, and they're obviously miniatures, but it's almost a stylistic choice as opposed to just a limitation of the technology. Another reason why I like this movie a lot better than the first one. I think the miniatures are just awesome. Okay, so we're going to have the first meeting of Christopher Walken and Max Schreck. We're coming up on my favorite line of the entire movie, actually. Here it comes. I love it. It's fairy time. Was it 15 years later? I still laugh at that. This may be a good opportunity to talk a little bit about the screenwriter, Daniel Waters, who um, the first film was written by Sam Hamm. It had some rewrites by Warren Scarron, who basically took over during the writer strike. There was a writer strike when the first Batman was being written. Sam Hamm is a little bit more respectable among the comic book community. He cares a little bit more about, well, how are we servicing the comic book character rather than are we making the movie that Tim Burton wants to make. He was against the two biggest grievances I think people have with the first movie, which is Vicky Vale going into the Batcave at Alfred's behest, which is hilarious, and they actually make a comment on that in this movie. And then, of course, the whole Joker killing Bruce Wayne's parents debacle. So in this movie, Sam Hamm gets a story credit, I would assume because he helped work on the story a little bit, but basically he wasn't particularly involved. The real screenwriter and story plotter was, for the finished script, I should say, was Daniel Waters, who he wrote Heathers. He has a very dark sense of humor, really fits with the tone, or the tone of this movie makes sense when you know that Daniel Waters wrote it, I should say. And I think he shines a lot in these. His dialogue shines with Penguin and Max Schreck in this scene and in other scenes as well. Later on when he's running for mayor, all that kind of stuff. Danny DeVito takes it and runs with it, but there's some great one-liners in here from Daniel Waters as well, for sure. And here we have the inevitable collaboration between our first two villains of the film. Obviously, there's a third sort of anti-hero villain coming up, but we have to start building up our evil plans, and obviously, um, no one's being honest with each other. Everyone has their own agenda and is going to try and make that agenda play out. I really love Penguin's motivation here. I just kind of want to watch the scene a little bit because this is one of my favorite scenes overall. What could be in Max Schreck's stocking, you ask? A lot of tape. As we relish in Danny DeVito's completely disgusting portrayal of the Penguin as he hands him Fred's dismembered hand here. Um, it's important to know that we're approaching, I think we're about 20 minutes into the movie, maybe 25 minutes, and we've seen Bruce Wayne / Batman for all of about 5 minutes, which, again, I said I think they do a good job of balancing all the different characters. But Batman definitely does seem to take a back seat because the movie really isn't about Batman. As a matter of fact, I would go so far as to say Batman really is the antagonist in both of Tim Burton's Batman movies. It isn't really till Batman Forever where it really feels like he's the protagonist. Really, this movie is about the Penguin. It's about Max Schreck, and it's about them, making their play on Gotham. It's about Catwoman and her own agenda for revenge. And Batman really is a supporting character. He is the antagonist there to stop them. He's the person preventing our quote unquote heroes from accomplishing whatever their goal is. Obviously, it's reversed. We're, following the villains and their goal, and the hero is the villain in so many words. I don't know if I explained that very well, but long story short, Batman's really just not a very important part of this movie, only insofar as that he's really the opposition. So we spend a lot of time with Selina Kyle. Here's another great Daniel Waters moment. I really love Daniel Waters' writing in this movie. Not because he does a good job of writing Batman, because he does a great job of writing really demented characters. And this is I should probably take a little bit of time to comment on Michelle Pfeiffer's performance in this movie as Catwoman, because we have got a really, really brilliant performance on her part, really supported by the set design. Here we have her getting dumped by her boyfriend. But how oppressive is this place? It's like the most foul pink color. And it's like she doesn't really have a personality. She's just kind of playing into the stereotypes. She's got all these stuffed animals. She doesn't really seem to care about them. They're just kind of there because she's a girl and she thinks she should have that. She thinks she should have a pink phone and live in a pink apartment. But all those things are crushing, literally crushing her. She has got, she barely shares the couch with all these stuffed animals that she's expected to have. And when you see the wide shots of the apartment, it's very, see, look at this. You have all these bars hanging in, and it's like a room that's oppressing her. It's literally closing in on her, and it's only a matter of time before she breaks out, which of course we're about to see the origins of how that happens in this scene here. Tim Burton is, of course, nothing if not a cinematic visual director. Here we have the next major confrontation of the film, which is, of course, our origin of Catwoman. Max Schreck is going to throw her out a window in a couple of moments. Max Schreck is, of course, by the way, the name of the actor who played Nosferatu, another reference to the German silent era that this film is clearly trying to mimic in some ways. I think of all of the villains from all of the Batman movies up until the Christopher Nolan movies, I think that probably Catwoman is the one that really holds up the best. I think she's a fascinating character in this. It's really interesting to see kind of their take on what she was before. One of the nice things about Catwoman as a villain, from a writing perspective, is, we've already seen a lot of different iterations of her, including different iterations of her backstory. Obviously, in year one, she was a prostitute. Here, she's a secretary, very sort of metaphorically prostitute-like, but obviously not literally a prostitute. And so it gives the writers a lot more leeway to be successful with the character. I think I would say, for my money, this is actually a much better interpretation of Catwoman than Anne Hathaway's interpretation in The Dark Knight Rises, which is just a little too clear-cut. She's kind of got taken a page from, I don't even know. A little bit from Frank Miller, in the sense that she's someone who's very poor and, kind of holding it against society. But beyond that, I don't know. It just doesn't have the extra layers of characterization that this one does, which you get from getting her origin in this scene here. Which is, of course, just about to happen. I hope you haven't. I hope you've seen this movie before, and you're not just watching my commentary, because I've spoiled this scene from the very beginning here. Great moment coming up. That is a mean, mean joke on the part of Max Schreck. Anyway, so here we're going to have the creation of Catwoman. And the official creation. Of course, we're getting this bizarre, and again, this is where the movie, like, it's like, okay, so you have this great setup for, you know, who Catwoman is before she becomes Catwoman. You know, this lowly secretary isn't respected, doesn't seem to really respect herself, and, you know, she's going to break out in a big way after her boss throws her out of a, you know, 40-story window or whatever. And then you get the Tim Burton twist on that, which is, well, now she's going to be eaten by cats for some reason. And it's just another one of those, you know, it's like when Penguin eats the cat at the very beginning of the movie. It's just so unnecessary and over the top. And it's just like this Tim Burton sort of art house moment where he wants to do something crazy for no good reason. And it's, you know, moments like these that make this movie terrible. And it's also moments like these that make this movie memorable. You know, there's nothing more memorable than watching it. Look at her eyes. Like, the way her eyes are fluttering. There's a cat eating her finger there. It's just demented. So bizarre. And, you know, this part's not funny. There's definitely, you know, people are very much of two minds, I feel like, when I talk to people about Batman Returns. It's either a very funny movie or a very scary, dark movie that you just feel like, you know, you get slapped around when you're watching it. And the truth is, it's very much both. You know, there's moments that are hilarious, there's moments of dark comedy, and there's moments that are just disturbing. Here comes a brilliant performance from Michelle Pfeiffer as she sort of makes her character's transformation happen, and not just in Tim Burton's visual way, but in this very, very dark performance piece here. And of course, we have a repeat of the scene we've just finished watching, but now we're going to see how she reacts to all of the same stimuli that she got when she came home the first time, a defeated person, and we're going to see her reaction to all of that same stimulation, the answering machine, the oppressive apartment, the obnoxious voicemails, and we're going to see how she responds to it now that she's gone through this experience. And of course, she's going to respond to it by being Catwoman. Anyway, so going back to just sort of the layers of this character, I just really find it very interesting. And it's the only character of the old movies where, like, I felt like I really needed to see that origin story. Like, it's nice seeing, you know, Jack Nicholson get thrown in and you see kind of that origin there. It's obviously an important counterpoint since, you know, he also created Batman, you know, 20 some odd years earlier. But I don't know if I needed it. You know, Joker's better kind of without that backstory usually. And, you know, you see the creation of the Riddler in Batman Forever, who, you know, it's just a stupid excuse to have Jim Carrey take up some screen time and be over the top and a little bit obnoxious. Not really particularly value added, at least not the way they did it. Whereas here, you're really filling out this character quite nicely. Look at that. Oh, evil. Just crazy. She hates kittens, apparently. I also like that she constructs her entire suit out of that one flimsy bit of latex. Of course, hello there is now hell here, which I remember seeing that in a commercial, or like in a magazine. There's a picture of her. Actually, you'll see it coming up where she's kind of like hanging off the windowsill or something, and it has hell here in the background. And I remember thinking that was, like, I shouldn't be looking at this because I was very young when this movie came out. I was actually not allowed to see this movie in the theater. I don't think I saw the first one in the theater either. I'm sure I didn't. I was much too young. Here I was kind of at that borderline age. But, of course, my parents had heard just how dark this movie was, and they weren't about to take that risk. I think if it had come out maybe a year later, I would have been allowed. Although, even when Batman Forever came out, there was a lot of back and forth about whether or not I would be allowed to see it. And again, watching her performance through this scene, I can't say it enough. I know I'm kind of saying the same thing again here, but every single thing she does, it's so melodramatic, but it gets the point across, and it really takes you to that place, even though you don't necessarily relate to her in a naturalistic way. the extremity of her performance, and here's the hell here, the extremity of her performance is still somehow very relatable, and again, very, expressionistic. It's or German expressionistic. It's not, it's not about the little things. It's about the broad strokes. If this was a silent movie, you could totally understand where Catwoman is coming from. If you cut out the dialogue and just have the events happen, you would still know where she's at as a character, still understand who she is through the visual cues that you're getting. So very, very, very well thought out, I think. And again, I love, that's a great film thing. It's, if you're into film, something like that's going to get you excited, and it gets me very excited. I'm very into cinematography and a lot of that kind of stuff. But if I'm going to see a Batman movie, and it's not that I don't want my Batman movie to be I want it to be cinematically competent, of course, but in this case, it's a case where the cinematic art of the craft of this film overtakes the property that they're going after, which, for better or for worse, that's what they did. I have no problem with that, because I've got plenty of other Batman comic books, and now I have plenty of great Batman movies as well that I can turn to if I want to watch a quote unquote straight Batman movie. In the meantime, I can just watch this and enjoy it for what it is, which is a great piece of film art, whether you want to admit it or not. I will defend it to the end of time. I always never quite got why the Penguin is in a rubber ducky kind of thing. Like, I still don't quite get that logic. Like, I get that it's an animal, it's a bird, but it's not very penguin-like. I don't know. I never quite got that. It's the one, like, bright, shiny yellow thing in this movie. Everything else is gray, and then he has this bright yellow rubber ducky thing, or mechanical duck. Now, I completely blew over it, but the person who nabbed this baby is actually, I can't think of his name, but you may recognize his face if you see it behind a lot of latex. He went on to play Abe Sapien in the Hellboy movies. I think his name's like Dave Johnson. It's something like very basic like that, very simple. And here we have our what is this? Our first scene with Bruce Wayne. After his initial appearance, we are now about 40 minutes into the movie, 45 minutes. And again, so like we've spent all this time developing our quote-unquote main characters, which are the villains. And here we're getting the scene of who should be our protagonist, but is actually the antagonist, and he's seeing what these guys are up to. And only then is Batman going to make his move and, again, move to intervene. Very much an antagonistic character, not the protagonist of this movie at all. We don't know who Bruce Wayne is. We don't really know what makes him tick. He's the villain of this piece. He's the token villain that's going to stop our main characters from accomplishing their goals. At all costs. And in this case, since he's the superhero, he succeeds. But although if you were writing this as a villain piece, maybe he wouldn't, because he's clearly not the person you're supposed to be rooting for in this, in an odd way. It's so weird. Such a weird choice. And that's true of both the Tim Burton movies. I think it's really because Tim Burton didn't know what to do with Batman. He didn't know what made that character tick, really. Or, I mean, he understood that he was dark and brooding, but he didn't really understand what that meant. He didn't understand the subtleties of it. And so he steers away from it and plays to his strengths, which are the things that are a little off, the things that are a little unusual, and that, of course, is the villains. Much like the Flash Rogues Gallery, the villains, if you don't understand how to write Batman, the villains are just automatically going to kind of overtake, because they're kind of so much more interesting in a lot of ways, and there's so much more to do with them than there is with Batman if you don't fully develop the Batman Bruce Wayne character, which Tim Burton didn't. So hence we got this. Same, and again, like it's kind of like with the Flash and the Rogues, where the Rogues oftentimes are much more interesting than the Flash, because Flash is just kind of a straightforward guy, whereas the villains have a lot of depth and a lot of interesting dynamics, especially when played against each other, which is what you get in Batman Returns with the Bat, the Cat, the Penguin, and and the Goody Two Shoes Max Shrek, or the Gotham's Golden Boy, or whatever they call him in this. So now, since we're going to spend a little bit more time with Bruce Wayne here, we should probably get a little bit more into depth with his character. Here's an interesting moment. So you've got Bruce Wayne's working in the Batcave doing his thing, and he's about to be served by Alfred, and he's getting fishy swir, which I have no idea what that is, but it's cold, obviously. It's supposed to be cold. And he just kind of goes with it, and he, obviously he doesn't have to show off to anyone here. But I mean, Bruce Wayne is an educated guy, and he knows how to be a playboy because he knows what it is to be a playboy, if that makes sense. And here, he's obsessed with being, with doing his Batman thing, and that's fine. That's true to the character. But the fact that he didn't know what Alfred was serving him, and he was just completely lost because basically Alfred gave him something that rich people would have, and he didn't know what to do with it. He's like, "This is gross. I don't know what this is." I don't quite get why they did that with Bruce Wayne. I think that it's a very inaccurate portrayal of the character. And I can only think it's because they're trying to make Bruce Wayne more relatable, and billionaires are not relatable characters usually. But it's to the point where, his character is completely preposterous. He sits in his tower, waits for the bat signal, goes out and does his Batman thing, and then whenever he's pressed to do something as Bruce Wayne, he can't seem to do it. He can't eat the fishy swir without spitting it out. Later on, we'll see him try and relate to women, which he cannot do. He fails miserably. Not a playboy at all. More just like a weird, creepy guy. More of a Michael Keaton type, if you will. Just kidding, Michael Keaton. Anyway, very, very missed. Another missed opportunity for, getting to see the fun side of Bruce Wayne. I guess you never get to see that in these movies. Which is why, again, they hardly use him, because there's nothing to do with them. If they don't know what to do with them, they just play to their strengths. And of course, we've just seen the Penguin, doing some stuff in the Hall of Records. He's going to recover his parents. He's doing all this stuff, getting media attention. Of course, this is not his ultimate goal. He has darker things in mind. And we'll kind of see where those things lead. But for now, we're just kind of on the journey, and we sort of don't really know what he's up to yet. We just know that he's found who his parents are. Great music from Danny Elfman here. I think his soundtrack to this movie is far superior to the first one. He still has the Batman March, but there's so much more going on in his soundtrack, partly because he has so many more characters to sort of write motifs for. But it's so much more melodic and operatic, and really playing into sort of, again, that silent era. That this movie, I think this movie would be better if there was no dialogue at all, almost. Which I shouldn't say that, because I love Danny Waters' script, but at the same time, like if you're looking at it from a visual perspective, this movie almost would work better with no dialogue, and because the dialogue isn't necessary, you don't need it. You see exactly what's going on with the Penguin here, without an ounce of dialogue. Another great line from Daniel Waters here. Oh, maybe that's not the line. There's a line coming up. Oh, there it is. They treated me like number 2. But I forgive them. It's funny. Oh, hang on one second here. Right there, that lady who just said he's like a frog who became a prince. That is Bob Kane's wife, actually. Bit of a cradle robber that one, since Bob Kane was what, 80 when this movie came out or more. And our first appearance of Catwoman in this movie. Now we're talking. The dialogue just pops. Even just random one-liners like, "I feel 5 feet tall," like we saw in the headline scene there. Just hysterical and over the top. What a great costume too. Of course, you have the scarred psyche of Selena Kyle represented with this stitched together mess of a costume. And here's another wonderful Bruce Wayne scene. Yet again, we're going to see Bruce Wayne fail at being a billionaire. So he's going to walk in. You're going to be cautiously sociable, but not really. Mumble, mumble, mumble. I actually love Michael Keaton as Batman in that it's such an original choice. And it's too bad because Michael Keaton doesn't have anything to do in these movies, and I wish he did because I actually can see he's a fun Bruce Wayne. I mean, just visually, he's a very interesting Bruce Wayne, and I do like the idea that he's just this little guy that becomes something that criminals can fear when he puts on the bat costume. I do appreciate that. I appreciate the direction, even though it's not true to the comics. I appreciate the idea of that direction. I just wish that Michael Keaton had more to do and more to say. I mean, here he's, again, he's just kind of a pawn that's being moved around, but not really developed in any way. But I do like his acting style in this. And I would love to see kind of where he could take it if given more to do. I actually really wish there was a while when he was going to do Batman Forever before he kind of ducked out. And I really wish he had done it because, again, in that film, Bruce Wayne has a character and he's the main character. And, you explore his backstory more than you did in the first two films combined. And, there's a lot of meat to chew as an actor. And I'd love to see what he would have done with that role. And maybe he could have brought the movie down a little bit more to earth rather than the over-the-top Val Kilmer. Although Bob Kane has been quoted as saying that Val Kilmer was his favorite Batman. I don't think he lived to see Batman Forever in theaters, but he did. He was alive on set for Batman Forever for sure, and he was very excited that Val Kilmer was playing Batman, who really isn't a bad choice to play Batman when you think about it. It's just, again, it's all about the movie that you end up playing Batman in, and Batman Forever obviously is what it is, and people think about it what they think about it, and of course it's the first one with Robin, so it's bound to be hated, especially in the 90s. It was very popular to hate Robin in the 90s, thanks to these movies, really. He's dead now. Great lines. I just love this script. It's so funny. And the acting. Again, I've said it so many times already, but the extreme expressions. Very, very not naturalistic at all, but in a wonderful way. In that wonderful silent era kind of way. And here's Bruce Wayne again. And we're gonna see Bruce Wayne be an amazing playboy. Watch this. She's gonna walk him out of his office. He's not gonna say anything, and he's gonna be like, "Huh?" "I'm leaving." Yep. As usual, Bruce Wayne has no idea where he is or what he's doing. He's mumbling and fumbling around with the ladies. Total playboy. Another great line. Another great line. Okay, and now next scene is going to be where Max Shrek sort of makes his play, which is he needs to make his power plant run. So he's going to try and get Oswald Cobblepot elected as mayor, so he can put Mayor Cobblepot in his pocket and get his power plant. Which let's talk about this story for a moment. So if you think in terms of like a strong narrative, again, and since Batman isn't the main character in his movie, there almost isn't a straight narrative. There's really three narratives. What Penguin wants to do, what Catwoman wants to do, and what Max Shrek wants to do. And it's the interweaving of those characters. And again, sort of what makes this movie really an epic, a character epic anyway. And but Max Shrek is by far, like, I love his character, but his plot is ridiculous. Like, what is he doing? He's creating a power plant that's going to suck power from Gotham City for some reason. Like, what is he going to do with his power that he's going to stockpile? I mean, obviously he's going to sell it back to the city later. But really, what is he's going to build this giant batteries? I mean, like, the amount of money he has to spend. Like, why doesn't he just, he's a billionaire. Why doesn't he just buy the power company? Like, rather than this bizarre get rich, which he's already rich, so like he doesn't need to get rich, but it's that whole point. What is that? Speaking of what is that, why did Danny DeVito have to be eating a raw fish in this scene? Tell me why. I can't imagine what it would have been like for kids to go see this movie. For the parents who didn't really pay attention, I'm kind of grateful that my parents, knew to pay attention and see whether or not I should go see this movie rather than just take me to a superhero movie, quote unquote. This easily could have been a very scarring movie. If you're like 5 years old and your parents are like, "Oh, let's take him to see Batman because it's Batman and who cares," and then you get this disgusting portrayal. Hilarious but disgusting, and definitely, as a kid, this would be horrifying. I would have nightmares, I think, if I had seen this any younger than I did, which was probably too young as it was. This is another great moment. One of my other favorite moments, the blood spurt in this is grotesque, and this is one of those moments where when a director has final cut, and it's so hard for them to get that, but when they have it, they run with it, which is why studios don't like to give it up, because then you get scenes like this that are graphic in this way right here. Look at that blood spurt. Completely unnecessary. An opportunistic moment for gore there. And of course, everyone still wants to make him mayor for some reason. Because they're all, I suppose, Max Shrek's cronies, as it were. Another very inappropriate moment for children from Daniel Waters. Courtesy. Of course, Joel Schumacher watched this scene and said, "Aha, I have the motivation for Mr. Freeze in Batman and Robin." Of course, why wouldn't he just freeze the city? Brilliant. Very untrue to the Penguin character, obviously. I should maybe talk a little bit more about that. But the fact that basically he's completely motivated by lust because he's been in the sewer and he hasn't, basically in so many words, he hasn't gotten laid in a long time. And he's literally motivated in this movie. It's like, well, I'll take a break from my evil scheme because I might get laid if I become mayor. Like, that's basically what this scene is telling us about the Penguin's character. Um, just very, very funny when you think about it, and completely un-Penguin like. Not that, I guess maybe he is a little bit of a deviant in that way, but not as blatant anyway. I mean, he has the money; he can buy any woman he wants in the comics, and he's a lord, he's a slum lord, or a gangster is the word I'm looking for. And here he's clearly not that. All right, now we get to our next major scene of Batman. Is this? I don't think. Is this only the second time we've seen him? Possibly. Not sure. Of course, we're gonna get a little carnage first, and again, we have a situation where, um, you know, our main characters, aka Max Shrek, Penguin, and Catwoman, have kind of made their moves and sort of set up, the next thing they're gonna do, and Batman is just gonna show up as he is right here. Again, clearly antagonist, here to stop whatever it is that our main characters are trying to accomplish. If I were to describe Michael Keaton's performance as Batman, I feel like he's not as much Batman as he is like kind of the Terminator. He's not really, he's not very fast. He's not very agile. He doesn't have much physical presence really. So goes a little adept there, but in a very silly way. But more than anything, he's got his gadgets, as you'll see here. But more than anything, he just kind of walks around and looks like a brick wall. It's pretty much all he does. When my girlfriend and I watched this a couple weeks ago, I think, we got to this part with this horrible computer animated thing, and then the dog catches it, even though the dog is clearly several feet below where the actual batarang was flying, and she just looked at it and she's like, "What the hell?" And their Batman just punched Ape Sapien again. Now we cut over to Catwoman. We're about to have our first major meeting of the three sort of the poster characters, if you will. Catwoman is just kind of joined in. Now you'll notice here she's not wearing heels, and then now she's wearing heels again. One of the things I really love about this movie is this is sort of at the height of the final moment of analog, we'll say. I'm pretty sure even like the digital shots that are in this movie, which there are only a few, although, and they're very noticeable, but even those were most likely optically printed into the film. They weren't digitally composited. So still very much pre-computers. And you can really see the limitations. Tim Burton isn't actually very good at some of those gags. Like other more adept filmmakers, I feel like can marry, the stunt person who doesn't have heels with, Michelle Pfeiffer who does have heels on, just as an example. But Tim Burton, it seems like you can always notice it, but it adds a charm. Like I don't mind that. I prefer a little bit of, a little roughness around the edges when I watch a film. It's just part of the fun of it, really. And you don't get that anymore because everything's so polished and digital. And here's the Terminator moment, right? Batman's just going to walk along. Nothing is going to stop him. Some giant guy is going to kick the crap out of him, but it doesn't seem to affect him. And all Batman can think to do is kill him, because that's what this Batman does. Literally blow him to smithereens. Dare I say it, sometimes you just can't get rid of a bomb? Speaking of Catwoman's heels, I never quite understood why the new Catwoman has heels. That's something that always bugged me. Like, Catwoman's costume in this is very cool and very much fits the character, and the heels are, just part of the ridiculousness of it, and, it's not trying to be realistic. But when you have a Catwoman where you're not even willing to, give her ears, you have to give her goggles that, lift up into ears, that's cool enough, but, if you're going for realism, yet she still has, she has higher heels than what Catwoman wears in this movie. And it always took me out of the moment when I was watching Dark Knight Rises. Catwoman just doesn't work for me in that movie as well, for whatever reason. That's definitely one reason. Again, very much a B character, as opposed to this where she's very much an A character. This is probably my least favorite scene of the movie. Just not very... up until Catwoman comes and says, meow, this is good. But that initial exchange between Penguin and Batman is pretty weak. Very sort of stock. Didn't feel like... they met each other and they said a couple lines, but nothing really very creative happened there. For all the brilliant writing that happens between, for example, Max Schreck and the Penguin, I would have liked to have seen something a little less than like, hi, who are you? I don't like you. I don't like you either. I'm going to stop you. Okay, like that's pretty much it. Of course, Penguin and his trick umbrellas. And we get this wonderful, I love this sort of circus-y theme. Again, I like Danny Elfman's score in this movie better than Batman, partly because of its variety, not just in character motifs, like I said before, but just musical style. There's a lot of variety between marches and sort of circus music and big thematic scores and everything. Love it when Batman and Catwoman fight in this movie. Every time, it's very entertaining. And this is very, like, if you... I feel like maybe the New 52 almost, when they first relaunched Catwoman, maybe took some cues from this version of Catwoman, in the sense that they're constantly, like here they're straight up fighting, but for most of the movie, they're just kind of like on each other in a sexual way, which is not, very much Catwoman issue 1 from the New 52, but other than that, not very true in the comics. And I know I keep saying I really love the Catwoman character in this, and again, it's an interpretation of Catwoman. I recognize this isn't necessarily, if you were to combine all the different Catwomans of the past, this isn't necessarily what would come out. It's not a super true iteration, but it is very interesting. Would like to take a moment as we're looking at Batman's sort of, I guess we'll say abs here. Not really, but whatever. As we're kind of getting a really close look at the costume here, it's interesting to see just how different it is from the first movie. In the first movie, first of all, the logo is not the Batman logo. It's some other bizarre logo that I still don't understand why they didn't use it, even though they used it in all the posters. It was the whole marketing scheme of the movie was the logo. And then in the movie, it doesn't have the logo. It has another logo. They got that right in here. But then also, in the first movie, he looks like an animal. And his costume is sculpted like an animal. He doesn't have bat nipples, but he does. It looks like it looks like skin in so many words. It's clearly intended to intimidate. And here, his suit kind of looks more like a car, if that kind of makes sense. I mean, it has more akin to his Batmobile than it does like any kind of human-like costume with the very straight lines, and it's very armor-like, I guess, is probably what they were going for there. And here we get another wonderful scene of Danny DeVito hamming it up, making his play for mayor. Great cheesy music again in the background. And speaking of German expressionism and sort of Germanic, silent era film stars, and I mean, he looks so much like Lon Chaney could have played the Penguin in this movie. His makeup is so intense and overstated, but in a way that's very, emotionally resonating. You don't look at the Penguin in this movie and you're not affected. Like, you look at it and it affects you on a kind of a guttural level, very much like Lon Chaney as, say, Quasimodo, or Max Schreck as Nosferatu. Just very visually stunning. And then, of course, Danny DeVito does stuff like this. Oh boy, horrible, absolutely horrible. And again, so once again, I can tell you what's going to happen in this scene. You know, we're going to have nice little character moment there. He's no longer the Penguin; he's Oswald. And then later on, when everything falls apart, he'll give up his Oswald name and become the Penguin again. But anyway, you know, I know what's happening in the scene. You know, I know what Penguin's motivations are. I now know what Catwoman's motivations are, and they're going to make a plan and follow through. There's not a single scene that I can think of in this entire movie where Bruce Wayne or Batman formulates a plan and follows it through. He just appears when it's convenient as a foil for our main characters, which I've probably driven that point into the ground at this point, but it's just so obvious. And I know that that was a major criticism of the movies back in the day. Um, but it is what it is, and I don't mind that because you know it's okay to have a story about Batman, or excuse me, about Catwoman and Penguin. Um, it just maybe shouldn't have been called Batman Returns. Should have been maybe called Batman is the B story, or Batman supporting character, or something like that. I love that scene coming up. Their plan to get rid of Batman is pretty great, particularly this aspect of the plan. And now we're alluded to basically the Penguin's true goal and what he was working on way back at the beginning of the movie, and yet now he's been distracted into this sort of mayor plot line, which is obviously Max Schreck's doing. But that the plot that's on the back burner there is still being alluded to because that's obviously going to come back into play as we reach the conclusion of the film. Now here is another great moment. One of the most of say the 5 most memorable scenes in the movie. This would definitely be one of them. Where Catwoman eats the birdie. My understanding is she did this for real. And again, you know, talking about the height of analog and pre-digital cinema, you know, nowadays they wouldn't even let her do this, I'm sure. But look at that. She just sits there with the bird in her mouth. And lets it out. What a great shot. You do not see that these days. Kind of an interesting part there, interesting line. Just when she was starting to feel good about herself, Batman got in the way, as if sort of his masculinity is what she really seems to have the problem with. Kind of interesting. I also love that she's got lipstick all over her face. It's like clearly not contained. I'm not sure if that was on purpose or if that's just a mistake. I don't know whose character moment is better here. Catwoman licking herself or the Penguin just sitting in the background going... And see, once again, you know, the only thing we know is Bruce Wayne's going to stop them. We see, basically, this is the moment where, you know, the foil for the main characters sees that, oh, the good guys are doing, or the main characters are doing something again. I better go stop them. No motivation whatsoever. Just, I'm going to go stop them. That's my plan. Be in the way. Make the story last longer. And then more silly Bruce Wayneisms. Although it does, and as I should say, as silly and un-Bruce Wayne-like as his performance is as Bruce Wayne in this movie, this is a pretty great scene in terms of how they play off each other. You know, he's kind of awkward because that's the nature of Michael Keaton's version of this character, and meantime, Selina is sort of in this other place, and you can see that she really has the split personality thing going on. This is probably our first time really seeing Selina since we saw her become Catwoman and act as Catwoman. We haven't really seen that she still has this sort of other side that's sort of wrestling, doesn't quite know what to make of this whole Catwoman piece, and we see her, staring at the window, saying, "What am I doing here?" as she just did. Ironic statements, as usual. And so begins the implementation of the big plan to frame Batman and make him look like a big tool, as if he couldn't do that on his own. The definition of the ditzy blonde. That's the type of girl that would have embarrassed Carrie into going crazy in Carrie. And here we have what a Tim Burton shot that was with this ridiculous couch, huge couch. There's a very Tim Burton has a very unique vision of Wayne Mansion in the sense that, I mean, again, you can tell he can't relate to Bruce Wayne as a billionaire because all he sees is, well, this house is huge and there's huge spaces. Even though Selina Kyle and Bruce Wayne are going to get very close here, there's a very strong sense of distance. And you have between the two of them, especially with this giant fireplace in the middle, this huge couch to which they're sitting on completely opposite sides of each other. It's a lot like in the original Batman movie when he invites Vicky Vale to Wayne Manor for dinner, and they're eating on completely opposite sides of the table, and it's just this huge long table, and it's sort of a kind of a picking on a cliche, but at the same time, that's a motif we see over and over again in Wayne Manor when we visit it in the Tim Burton movies, and clearly, Tim Burton wasn't quite comfortable with Bruce Wayne and his character and his mansion and his money, because the character in the movie isn't comfortable with it, and the visual cues we get within the movie, just the way we get the, with Selina's apartment where it's all closing in on her. In this, it's the opposite. It's like he can't seem to get physically close to anyone. Maybe it's intended to imply that sense of distance that Bruce Wayne has from everyone in these movies. And again, I prefer the Playboy Bruce Wayne more than not that Bruce Wayne is not dark and brooding, but when he's Bruce Wayne, he acts like Bruce Wayne, and he acts like a playboy, and he doesn't just shut himself off to the world, and he doesn't have this feeling of distance from everybody. I mean, Batman has a very strong family. Batman has the biggest family of anyone, really, other than, say, the X-Men, which is, more of a club than a family, if you want to call it that. And yet, the aloneness, it just gets to a point where it's too much, I think. If you want to criticize this for its authenticity, anyway. Great scar there. That looks like a toxic burn. It makes you wonder what Batman had in his utility belt there. This plot point feels very much like the 60s Batman TV show to me, in the sense that it's like, it's very easy to frame Batman. He's got however many years. I don't know how long this is supposed to take place after the first film, but I would assume about 3 years, just as a wild guess. since there were three years between the filming of the first and the second one. And it takes, one small thing to happen for everyone to just suddenly think that Batman has turned evil. It's very convenient. And here's more Bruce Wayne being befuddled and, oh, tell her the business trip, tell her this and that, tell her all these things. I don't know what to say, so just make something up. Poor Alfred. Alfred is another kind of, I dare I say, wasted character in these films. I mean, he does kind of. I love Michael Gough, and I think he's a great choice. And only Tim Burton would have thought to choose someone like him. I feel like to play Alfred, but at the same time, again, it's a matter of what meat does he have to chew on as an actor. Michael Caine was graced with someone, who decided to write Alfred as a sarcastic sort of, you're my boss, but I'm not going to necessarily respect you for deciding to dress up like a giant rodent kind of thing. Whereas Michael Gough is sometimes he's quietly protests, but on the whole, he's just very much just sort of the yes sir man, does what he's told. This is kind of fun. Very different from, the suit up scene in the first Batman movie is much more traditional, where you have, in that case, Batman's suit was in a vault basically, rather than this sort of room. It was just like basically fixated into the wall, and you had the putting the glove on, putting the boot on, flipping the cape over his head kind of shots. Very much more traditional to what you'd expect from sort of the superhero suiting up. In this movie, you have this very bizarre sort of like he's got this whole wardrobe of costumes, very unlike anything else that we've seen in any of the movies or the movies since then. Kind of an interesting choice. I like that, but again, I don't quite get it. It's one of those things that I don't quite understand, but I think it's cool. And then once again, we have the return of Abe Sapien right there, and the sort of the first three people who walked in, he's kind of the guy in the middle. There he is, right on the far left. Some more early computer animation. I will say that while I do enjoy analog, I thought that the way they visualized the Batmobile getting its armor in the first movie was it didn't look very good. It was, I'm not quite sure how they did it. It was a stop motion animation thing, but it wasn't very organic. It just kind of happens, and it's very obvious when it's, they switch from the effect to the actual model at the end. It just kind of takes you out of the moment. And here, I think the 3D computer animation does kind of help that along, even though it looks pretty silly. On to our second major confrontation. I love this dialogue here. High fiber. We do. Great moment. And it forgives some of the horrible stunt choreography that these movies have. That's part of what makes these fights so memorable is since there's so much banter in between the two, that's very engaging. You kind of forget for a little while. Shouldn't Batman be able to do something a little bit more than have a chair thrown at him and walk quickly towards the door when they're getting away with the suspect? That's pretty hilarious. I love, Batman doesn't run. He physically couldn't turn his head in the suit, which is why you get that silly bat turn whenever he has to look in another direction. But um, he can run in that suit, surely. Yet he doesn't. He just kind of walks like the Terminator until he gets where he needs to be. Catwoman's had about 5 minutes to set up this elaborate scheme while he walks up slowly to the top of this roof to deal with the situation. And actually, this is probably the ultimate circumstance of him failing to act. There's no way that Batman would just stand here and watch this happen. And then, he's like, oh, wait. Oh, no. Sorry, I missed you. Bye. As far as I'm concerned, Batman is responsible for her death. Because he could have done a lot better than that. One thing I'll give this movie some pretty strong kudos for is this is the only movie of the Batman movies where you really see bats up until Batman Begins. One of the fun things about Batman Begins was there are bats galore in that movie. And, from the scene in Arkham when he calls the bats in using his thingamajig, to just when he's in the cave and he's being surrounded by bats, like a tornado of bats. Really cool stuff. And there's no bats in these movies, in these early 90s movies, except for Batman Returns. You get the scene here especially, where they come out of the trees, and in a moment we'll see them again. A really great pop point here with the line, the mistletoe line that I just talked over. My apologies. A mistletoe is deadly if you eat it, but a kiss can be even deadlier if you mean it. And that'll come back to play a really elegant way for later. I won't spoil that. I'll wait until we get to that moment. But remember that line. That'll be important to come up. And here's where we get our next major Bat moment. I love this ridiculous transformation that Batman's costume goes through here. Boom! Becomes a hang glider somehow. And then we get another moment with bats everywhere, and then Batman flying through the bats and sort of, even though it doesn't necessarily really happen, I kind of, in my mind, I pictured the bats are sort of following the leader away from the crowd, even though he just kind of plays off, just goes off and the bats are still there. In my mind, that's sort of what I picture happening, sort of behind the scenes while we're watching this. Another great line, yet again. I have to say that while I do love each of these characters individually, and some of their banter together is really great as well, it is kind of an odd pairing to have, Penguin and the Catwoman. Like, how do these characters really complement each other? That's definitely, I think, a fair criticism you could make. They're allowed to be in this movie because they're both Batman villains, but, with Batman Forever, there's a reason that the Riddler and Two-Face are put on screen together, and they complement each other in a particular way. In this, they're just kind of like, there's one guy who's sex crazy, and there's one kind of going through this sort of crisis of womanhood or something. So many words, very poor way to explain that, but we'll just say that. And they don't really play off each other. Catwoman really, her beef is really with Max Schreck. So the stuff happening here with the Penguin is ultimately superfluous to the resolution of the story. It's just kind of some things that they can do throughout the course of the middle of the movie before we get to the end of the movie is really kind of what you think of it as. But it's really hard to judge the plot of this movie because, again, it's not really so much a plot. It's an epic of characters, and those characters are going to kind of go on their journeys, and they're going to intersect throughout the film in various different ways, and they're each going to kind of come to their separate conclusion. More so than the story having a really clear plot. Even at the end when, Penguin does sort of makes his final move, and we find out what the list is that he's making, that we've seen allusions to a couple times so far. There's not really a big sort of be-all end-all ending that you can really predict coming up. It's really just kind of a lot of stuff happening. But I kind of like movies like that. If the characters are good, it's fine to just kind of hang out with them and kind of see where things go. And, of course, here comes the second part of Batman's incrimination, which is Penguin getting to drive the Batmobile. I love this scene. Very cool. Lots of great effects, practical effects in this sequence that are really fun to watch. And again, this is another one of those, like, when you watch all these cars getting ruined in, like, Michael Bay Transformers movies, like, it's just a bunch of computer stuff. There's some real cars, sure, but, there's a lot of computer explosions and computer stuff going on, and it takes away from sort of that visceral reaction that you get when compared with something like this scene, whereas you'll see, I mean, there's a pretty good car carnage in this as we continue forward. Crush that car. It's all very clearly staged. Again, Tim Burton isn't very good at practical effects. Like, when you see cars flipping over, which will be coming up here in a second, there are places where you can see the wires that are rigged up to flip these cars as Batman comes flying through. Here we go, this scene here. It doesn't look particularly real. But again, because his style has such a hyper reality to it, it works anyway, sort of in spite of itself. But again, we get some good carnage here. Nice to see some practical effects. Missed that in movies. I went to see RoboCop yesterday, and there's not a single real thing that happens in that movie. It's a lot cheaper when you don't have to really destroy anything. Here's an important plot point. Probably the most egregious, ridiculous moment in the movie. You saw earlier Batman inserting the CD into his little CD player or CD recorder, and obviously the Penguin is incriminating himself, and the way that plays out is nothing short of hilarious. Almost Bat credit card worthy, I have to say. And of course, Batman stops just in time to not hit the poor little lady with her groceries. Priceless. And it's great. I love the fake, like, Penguin took the time to make this silly fake Batmobile with his little wheel in the shape of Batman's symbol. This is very silly. And then, of course, just in case you need to get through a narrow alley that's completely arbitrarily in one point of Gotham that you might have to go through someday, the Batmobile can transform into the Bat train thing. I don't even know how to describe it. One of the things that's frustrated me about all the movies, especially this is a good example. Later in the movie, there's sort of a bat boat, but it's not really a boat. It's like a ski jet thing. And then even in Dark Knight Rises, when he's got quote unquote the bat, which is basically sort of the bat helicopter or something, but they have all these weird vehicles for Batman to drive that'll make great toys, but at the same time, like, Batman has a pretty distinct arsenal, and like, what the Batplane is. You know what stuff he has to work with. And so when they keep giving him more and more vehicles, it's like, he's got enough vehicles already. You don't need to go crazy on all these sort of bizarre iterations like this, the Bat Bullet or the Bat Train or whatever that thing was just called. And this is a pretty pivotal scene in the movie because this is really the beginning of the final turn that each of our characters are going to go on. With the foiling of the Penguin, you have sort of Max making his final play, which is to get away and live to fight another day. Penguin's obviously going to abandon his mayor conquest because he's about to get foiled here. Again, I hope you've watched this before I sit here spoiling it away. And then Selina Kyle is preparing to make her final move as well. There's a great Great line of fan service where they addressed the fact that Alfred let Vicky Vale into the Batcave, one of the most ridiculous things to happen in all the movies. Something Alfred would obviously never ever do, yet he did in the original Batman movie in 1989. I like that Iron Maiden. I think that's a great, and again, nothing to do with comic book continuity. No reason he would go down a little, chute like a toddler, but but it's a great little moment and fits within the context of the world they've created. And that's the most important thing I think to remember. Like, it's easy to rag on this movie about how un-Batman like it is. But the question is, does it work within itself? Because we'll always have the comic books, we'll always have the Christopher Nolan Batman movies. But does this interpretation hold up in the context of itself? And I think that it does. I mean, even though it's nothing like what we're used to, and nothing like what we would really want to see again, within itself, if you sit down and watch it, and just forget all that stuff, and just watch it as a movie, I think that it works. And again, like I said, even though this is my favorite Batman movie, it's not because, or my favorite Batman movie from the 90s, it's not my favorite Batman movie because I love Batman in it, it's because of everything else. The best worst movie, if you will. And here comes the back credit card moment here, by the way, in just a moment. And there it was, the moment where he does those little DJ thing with that CD. Pretty silly stuff. Like I said, almost back credit card worthy, but not quite. Not quite as bad as that. Might as well be, though. It's about as inept. And Penguin has now been completely abandoned again. And again, the inevitable Dan Waters comment coming up here. Great commentary. Why does everyone bring eggs and tomatoes to a speech? Unless they're planning on hating it. And then we see basically here, this is where Penguin really comes full circle. And again, this is very much, not about driving the plot. We've basically abandoned the plot from the middle act of the movie, and we're going to start a new plot for the third act as far as what Penguin's really out to do. But what we are getting is sort of a kind of like a rhyming kind of, we're getting verses in the sense that, the first verse is, Penguin is born and everyone he knows rejects him. They take him to the bridge and they throw him in. He comes back, and right when he thinks he's getting somewhere, even though he still is pretty foul guy and has the worst intentions, everyone ultimately rejects him and chases him right back into the river again, which is going to lead him to his final act of the movie, which is, of course, exact his revenge, and reveal what is in the legal pads that we've seen him touting around throughout the first third or so of the movie, and here they are. Another great line coming up. No, it's a lot. Just so snarky. The whole, if I were to describe this script, it's snarky. Great matte painting here. Clearly not real. It looks like, again, I mean, like they could have done that in King Kong. Like the only difference between this and King Kong is that this is in color. But nothing better than what Willis O'Brien would have done. Yet it's very appealing to me. I love practical effects. Fantastic stuff. Of course, now we're not so heavy on Prince this time around. Last time Prince did all of the pop music and wrote a whole bunch of songs for the movie. For this film, we have just a regular soundtrack, so they just throw in random tracks when they have to. Like for example, at this party, much more fitting. The one song that's really sort of this movie is called "Face to Face," which we're going to hear it coming up very shortly. And it's a song that's kind of, I don't know, it fits the right tone. Prince is not the right tone. Like even for the Joker, which is where they really used his music, it's not. It doesn't fit the Tim Burton tone. The song is starting right now for tracks in the '90s. Feels like it fits. Like it's got kind of a darkness to it, which is very good. Partly from the lead singer's voice, which is very early '90s. The song is very early '90s sounding, but like I said, I feel like it's appropriate. Much better than all the Prince nonsense from the last film. There's something about Batman and Catwoman always meeting at a costume party. Happened in Dark Knight Rises as well. It just seems to be a running theme. Of course, there's the element that both of these guys wear masks, and neither of them know who each other is, and in the sense these two have come here the only people not wearing masks, and yet they are, because Bruce Wayne, of course, is the true mask of Batman, which is who he really is. And the same thing you could say is definitely true of Catwoman to a degree, although she's a bit more complex. But of course, I don't know if even Tim Burton gets that reference based on the way this dialogue sort of plays out, because they talk about not wanting to wear masks anymore, which is a theme that kind of comes up a few times in these earlier movies. And it's like, guys, Bruce Wayne is the mask. there is no other mask. So anyway, I'll stop ranting about that. And of course, we're coming up on a key moment, and the reprisal of the line that I told you to remember earlier coming up here. It's actually just a couple seconds away. Here, Selina's sort of showing her true colors, but there's no connection to be made really yet. Still just a couple minutes. And again, great performance here from both of them, even though, again, not Bruce Wayne, but what he is good here. I think the chemistry between the two really works. The sort of neuroses, you can really feel their neuroses, and when they kiss, it feels very demented but real. And then, of course, the line. And then, of course, the realization between the two of them. And I think that's actually a very elegant way for them to find out who they each are. And it shows, they have this bizarre emotional connection as Batman and Catwoman, and they've developed a connection as Selina Kyle and Bruce Wayne. And it's when they it's like they get to know each other well enough, and that's how they find out, more than about, oh, peeked a look under his mask, and that's how I figured it out, or just something sort of trite. Instead, they find out as a character point, which I think is very smart, very good. Although nothing will rival the way Lois Lane finds out Superman is actually Clark Kent in the Richard Donner version of Superman 2, where she basically holds a gun to his head and says, hey, I've been risking my life, put myself in all these perilous situations to try and trick you into showing that you're Superman. Well, how about I risk your life instead? And she shoots him point blank range. Great stuff. Of course, she reveals that she shot him with blanks, and so when he gives himself away, he was just being a fool. And here comes Penguin's final play, and we're rounding out into the final confrontation here with all of our wide array of characters that we've been following throughout the course of this movie. Gotta love the Stan Winston puppets in the background there. There are lots of different versions of penguins in this movie. They did use puppets from Stan Winston, as you can kind of see in the background there. I'm pretty sure those are all Stan Winston's puppets. They also had full-on bodysuits. People walked around dressed as penguins, like they would walk around and dress in a gorilla suit or something like that. Which those ones are actually very obvious, but at the same time, they're appropriate for the scene when they appear. I'll point them out when we get there. And then they had real penguins just dressed up with crazy gizmos on their faces. It's again part of the analog area of era of film is there was more than one solution to do everything, and it's kind of fun seeing what solutions they come up with when they choose to use those and why they choose one solution over another, and all that kind of stuff is fun. Of course, he's come to take Max. Back to our miniature set of Arctic World. And we got another great moment, kind of our last really great moments for the Penguin. At this point, he's really just sort of become the villain. But I do like his little monologue here. His trick umbrella, which is actually just there to lure children in. Of course, he's a hideous monster. The juxtaposition of those two elements is pretty funny, really. And then, of course, that'll pay off. Again, a lot of good sort of setups and payoffs in this movie. That umbrella will pay off later, as we'll see. But to this point now, Penguin's just pretty much a straight villain, and most of the sort of the character development stuff coming up is really just with the resolution of Catwoman. Penguin is kind of already apexed about as far as where he's going as a character. He doesn't really have much left to develop. His character is very much a story of trial and failure. He's tried to do one thing and he's failed, so now he's gonna resort to the worst case scenario. Great shot of Batman's shadow there. There's a kind of a fun story here with this monkey. Danny DeVito, they tested this shot before they did it so that the monkey wouldn't feel nervous when he went to do this. And so they did a couple takes. It seemed to be working fine. And then they rolled camera, and Danny DeVito proceeded to walk towards him, not as Danny DeVito, but as the Penguin with his and his freaking and the screaming and all this stuff that he does just as part of his character. And sure enough, the monkey freaked out on set and took off. And it took quite a while, apparently, for them to calm the monkey down so they could try doing the scene again. So you could argue that this is, the idea of, Penguin has a penguin army that's going to basically blow up Gotham City. That's basically what's happening here. You could argue that this is more far-fetched than Mr. Freeze freezing in all of Gotham, and then them using satellites to refract light to save Gotham. All these ideas are just so broad. But the thing that's brilliant about this movie that isn't brilliant about movies like Batman and Robin is the movie is broad. And not to say that Batman and Robin is, if Batman and Robin is nothing if not broad, but um, it's all about the world building that Tim Burton has done up to this point. You buy it because the world is just that bizarre and that ridiculous, and there's been so many sort of over the top moments that this one doesn't. It fits the tone of the film, and it works. Um, for me, when you watch Batman and Robin, that I get a kick out of Batman and Robin as well, to be honest, because it's silly. Not a movie I enjoy as a Batman fan, but a movie I like to laugh at, I guess. Um, but when you get to the ending, it's like it's just so much nonsense piled on so much nonsense. It just doesn't really add up to anything. It's just a lot of basically toys because the whole movie is a toy commercial. Here, it fits the aesthetic, at least to me. I suppose you could probably argue that that's true with Batman and Robin, but for me, it doesn't. It's different. There's something different about it to me. Of course, we're going to see some more wonderful um, trick technology. This time by Alfred, the arbitrary hacking into the systems where all they've got to do is press a button and they can basically take control of Penguin Army. And here's that vehicle, by the way, I was talking about. It's kind of a ski thing, but it can very obvious model shot there, by the way. But yeah, it's the Batboat, but it's not. It's sort of a ski thing. It's kind of can run on water. It just kind of does stuff. Whatever they needed to do. They just read the script and just do what the script says. No big deal. And again, the architecture of Gotham right there with the figures. Very cool stuff. I actually think I prefer Bo Welch's Gotham City to Anton Furst. And again, there's the the Laborman in the background there. I do like it, and I like the way it's filmed. Again, the sort of the monochromatic, not quite black and white. It's almost black and white, but it's got this sort of cold hue to it. I don't want to say blue, but it's just this sort of coldness that isn't quite white. It's just it's off color. Really makes for, I think, a dark but beautiful looking film. That, by the way, that shot there of the penguins turning around was one of the more obvious computer generated shots in the movie as well. Big silly mess of you can tell they're not even really animated. They just kind of move and turn around. Something you could do in flash animation now, no doubt. But pretty big deal for the time. And then here we've got some real penguins. Love the intercutting. It's cool. And for some reason, Batman's Raider sounds like a quacking duck. No offense intended, by the way, quacking duck, if you're watching this. The bat something. What do we call this thing? Kind of a great moment here when even the people who have followed Penguin to the very end are about to abandon him, leave him completely alone. You can see, he's really a frightened individual. Again, these are very broad strokes. It's not, necessarily touching the way this plays out, but you can tell the frustration. And you really feel it. And then you turn around and you see that line on his butt crack that is terrifying, and kind of forget about being sympathetic. But and there's that duck again. Now Batman must choose: does he want to wreck his very fragile nonsense mobile, or does he want to continue on to the lair? And he'll choose to, of course, wreck it. This is a cool moment when that thing comes out of the top and crushes the duck finally. Pretty cool. I enjoy the design. Although look at that. Okay, so you got to look at that. When Batman comes out, like, you can see he doesn't actually fit into the cockpit, because that's obviously like a very small little model thing that they have there. And so in order for him to get in there, you can tell he's actually just bent over, and then when they open the hatch, he just kind of picks his head up. If you watch that closely, you'll see what I'm talking about. Another one of those moments where, again, a practical effect that Tim Burton is not very good at, and just kind of ruins the moment almost, but in a way that's kind of appealing. Once you get used to watching it, it's kind of, I don't know. Like I said, it's just something appealing about it. And then last but not least, Batman turns even the Penguins against the Penguin. Gotta feel a little bad for the Penguin. I mean, he gets pretty screwed in this movie. Like, he's a pretty foul guy, but he just can't catch a break either. Boom. And of course, the solution. Burn. Let it burn. And then more bats. Hey, again, more bats. I've kind of forgot about that. Another opportunity to bring the bats back. I think Batman himself is cooler. Like, he's got cooler stuff in this movie than in the first Batman movie as well. Like, in the first movie, he had those, like, his gauntlet sparked when he fought the guy with the swords, and he had a couple little trick things, and they had the what's the word of it? The grappling hook. But in this movie, he's got the bats that come out on cue. He's got his cape, which turns into that super huge hang glider. He's got just lots of fun, ridiculous, but fun gadgets. And then now that we've kind of taken care of the Penguin, at least for the moment, we get to resolve our other major story, which is the one between Max Schreck and Catwoman. There's a lot more sort of cool flying Batman shots as well, where he's sort of gliding with his cape. We'll see another one of those in a minute. That's pretty cool. What I don't understand, I don't know if you can notice it very well there, but watch for it as we watch this scene. The whatever that metal thing is behind them is actually like on springs, and it's bouncing up and down. I have no idea what that is. If anyone knows, feel free to let me know. By the way, here's that cool swinging shot where Batman swings in, obviously on a cable and pulley, but pretty cool. I love that moment. Max Schreck, you're not just saving a life. And you can see, again, the visual nature. You do not need a single word of dialogue to really convey what's going on in this movie, because the costumes say it all. Like, Catwoman, as she's literally unraveling, her suit is unraveling. Her hair is falling out of her mask, and she, not only does she look like a caged animal, but it totally represents sort of the fracturing of these two psyches that she's created, and it's coming to a head here as Batman and Bruce Wayne, who she seems to have fallen in love with, is sort of trying to bring those two personalities back together. And one of my favorite moments, all-time favorite moments of this movie, and again, it's not a great Batman moment, but it's a great moment in this movie. In the context of this movie, it's brilliant. When he rips his costume off and kind of exposes himself to her. is a really great moment. Even though there's that practical effect again, practical effect problems where he doesn't have the makeup on his eyes, so it looks ridiculous. But something very meaningful in that moment, even though it's completely unbelievable from the perspective of quote unquote Batman. I just love this scene. I apologize, I'm just kind of watching it. Another great line. He is Batman, you moron. And of course, Tim Burton has to bring this sort of fairy tale quality to it and bringing back the myth of the cat and the 9 lives, supported by some great dialogue, of course, by Daniel Waters. Two lives left. She's got one to spare. And I love the way she finally finishes him off, gets her revenge, bringing back the taser. Very poetic. And again, that thing on springs. Someone explained that whatever those fans are, that's on this. Those are on springs, and they're bouncing up and down for some reason. Just don't get it. I love the image when Batman comes over here to sift through the wreckage. It's a great moment coming up, which you'll see, of course, unless you decide to turn the movie off now. But why would you do that? We're almost there. But of course, now this is the moment. I did say we're kind of getting the last of the character moments from the Penguin, but this is a great moment. And again, no dialogue necessary, just a beautiful score from Danny Elfman. And of course, excessive, he's spilling ink out of his mouth. It's just excessively gross. And I don't know that was necessary or not. I think it fits, but it's grotesque for sure. Followed by this grotesque moment that the reprisal of the smoking corpse, as we had in the first Batman when Joker electrocutes the guy who tries to stand up to him at that crime lord meeting. Great soundtrack though, as Penguin makes his last attempt and picks the cute one. Oh, so poignant and yet funny. It's like it's so black. It's like the blackest comedy because you really do feel for the guy, even though you almost have no reason to. He's been scum the whole movie, but he just needs a glass of water, and then he dies. Sad. And then the music swells up, and we get again this great piece from Danny Elfman. And as I said before, no dialogue necessary. It's just a visual feast. You just watch it and listen to the music. That's great. And by the way, these are the penguins where they're actually just people in suits, which is why they're huge. They're like literally as tall as. Of course, since Danny DeVito is so short, these are as tall as Danny DeVito. But I suppose they're supposed to be emperor penguins, so presumably their emperor penguins are a bit taller. Not really sure. I don't know my penguin knowledge as much. I don't know as much about penguins as I know about Batman. What can I say? I'll shut up so we can just listen to this music. Okay, so final scene of the movie. Um, this is one where the studio did give some notes, and one of the ones that they listened to, at least, what they did want to have one. I think the scene was here, but it didn't end the way it does. And as you'll see, here's Catwoman. You think you see Catwoman, and I don't know. I'm not sure how much of the scene was there. If it just they're driving and then they kind of look up and you see the bat signal and you get the end of the movie. But basically, the idea was they did want to bring Catwoman back for um, just for audiences, which is appropriate because she's really the one who has the most transformative experience, I think, of everyone in the movie. So you kind of want to see her and finish with her. In a lot of ways, she's the real main character, I think, in this movie. Um, anyway, so we didn't see Catwoman come back originally in the original ending of this film, and then shortly before the movie came out, they decided to add it. So what you're seeing, or what you're about to see in this final effect, is um, a very rushed last minute little piece where they incorporate her into this final shot. It's coming up just a second here. I would imagine he probably does get out of the car. He sees what he thinks is Catwoman's shadow, but it's actually just a regular cat. I would imagine that's where the movie originally left off. Instead, we get this extra shot. This is their pathetic attempt to try and give Bruce Wayne an arc. See, apparently what Batman learned in this is that he should respect women too. At least that's all I can come up with. Otherwise, you can't for the life of me, you cannot convince me that he's here for any other reason than to just be a foil for all of the other characters in the movie. But this is the shot here. So fade up, you see the bat symbol, and you'll notice there's nowhere for Catwoman to stand. It sort of is this big empty space, and yet here she pulls up, and the reason for that is because that is what was added, was this shot of Catwoman. And that's the end of the movie. So I'm gonna let you guys enjoy the music as we finish out the credits because my voice couldn't possibly be more hoarse. I hope you enjoyed this Minutia Minute. If you liked it, let me know. This was actually pretty fun. I feel like I got to say what I wanted to say, so maybe we'll do this again sometime with another movie. In the meantime, like I said, I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you have a newfound appreciation for Batman Returns, at least on the level that I do. Again, I would not ask to defend this movie as a Batman movie, but I will defend it as a great '90s Tim Burton movie. Super interesting, lots and lots to take in, both visually and from the perspective of all their different characters. Really enjoy this one. Anyway. So if you want to laugh, it's funny and it's black. I still can't decide if it's just a dark movie or if it's a comedy. But anyway, if you're in the mood for something like that, well, you just watched it, so go find something else. All right, this is Beardo signing off again. Hope you enjoyed. Thanks a lot, guys.